Tonight on the wrap, ceasefire, what ceasefire? 100 targets in 10 minutes. Israel launches a massive wave of strikes on Lebanon, killing more than 250 and injuring hundreds more. Israel's Prime Minister insists the war is not over despite the ceasefire. Iran's celebrations are short-lived following the bombardment, with Tehran threatening a regretful response unless attacks against Lebanon cease. In the US, Donald Trump claims a complete victory in a call with Sky News, a sentiment echoed by his defense secretary.
President Trump forged this moment. Iran begged for this ceasefire, and we all know it.
Sir Keir Starmer travels to the Gulf, saying there's still a lot of work to do to secure a permanent end to the hostilities. Plus, making the most of it. Much of Britain basks in temperatures of up to 25.5 degrees, but there is a return to cooler conditions on the way. Well, we discuss the day's biggest stories with Tony Diver, political editor of the Daily Telegraph, and Jessica Elgott, deputy political editor of The Guardian. Plus, a first look at the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers, including concerns for the fragile ceasefire in the Middle East. Well, good evening to you, and Jessica, Tony, welcome to you both as well. What a difference 24 hours makes. As we came on air last night, Donald Trump was threatening to destroy a civilization, and then an 11th-hour deal between the US and Iran for a 2-week ceasefire. Well, a couple of hours later, the US president was on the phone to Sky News, hailing it as a great success. But it seems Israel had unfinished business. Its military today launching its largest coordinated strike on Lebanon, killing more than 250 people. Iran says this was not what was agreed and is threatening a regret-inducing response. Well, Jessica, Tony, amongst all the issues and difficulties that lie ahead, the bombardment of Lebanon will certainly be one of them.
Well, that's right. Last night we thought there wasn't going to be a ceasefire. Then there was. We were hoping that there was going to be some respite from this war. And now today we see one of the most brutal attacks by Israel that the war has seen against Hezbollah. I think it's quite clear that this fighting is not going to end as quickly as some hoped.
Jessica.
If you zoom out a bit, what is so extraordinary is that there seems to have been a complete misunderstanding between the two sides about what the ceasefire actually covered. J.D. Vance saying today it never was promised that it should cover Lebanon. Iran clearly believed it should.
Jessica, Tony, we'll hear more from both of you in a moment. Well, the Israeli attacks on Lebanon, on Iran-backed Hezbollah, were the biggest since the war began, with 100 targets hit in just 10 minutes. Tonight, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said he had insisted that Hezbollah was not part of the ceasefire deal, saying we continue to strike them forcefully. From northern Israel, here then is our international correspondent, Diana Magnay.
Massive destruction in the heart of Beirut, in the centre and the west of the city, bustling residential and commercial districts, not just the southern suburbs, the Hezbollah strongholds, though they've been hit too. Is anyone in there, a man calls out, hoping for signs of life beneath this rubble, great piles of it. 100 targets hit across Beirut, the eastern Bekaa Valley and the country's south, all in the space of 10 minutes. Israel's largest attack since the start of the war and weeks in the planning.
I've said temporary ceasefire with Iran wouldn't include Hezbollah, and we continue to strike them with all our might. Today, we've dealt them the biggest blow suffered since the pages. We have attacked 100 targets in 10 minutes in places they were certain were immune and bulletproof.
And there are significant civilian casualties. How could there not be with this amount of firepower and no prior warning? Hundreds killed, more than 1,000 wounded.
It's a crime after a crime. They are martyrs. God bless them. What can we do? We are doing our duty. This is a crime. The state has to do something.
This is a separate skirmish, Donald Trump has said, of Israel's fight with Hezbollah, not part of the deal he'd struck. But Iran wanted the guns to stop with this war too, and will be weighing its response. For Israel to hit Lebanon this hard at this point suggests that it is trying to inflict maximum damage on Hezbollah while it still can and before it is forced to stop. We're 10 kilometres from the border here. This is one of those northern communities that has seen its fair share of Hezbollah strikes. And it is towns like this that Israel has said that it is determined to protect at seemingly any cost.
You are looking at this one.
Okay.
Okay, and we are somewhere else.
Sarit Zehavi runs a centre which focuses on the security challenges on Israel's northern border. She thinks Israel is right to press on.
We are tired of wars. We want to make sure that this time something will truly change.
Are you prepared to have the war with Iran ongoing if it means that you can keep fighting Hezbollah?
We are prepared to defend ourselves as much as it takes.
But these don't look much like defensive strikes, whatever Israel says. And Iran is taking note. The Speaker of the Parliament posting that negotiations were unreasonable with 3 of their key conditions unmet: the ceasefire in Lebanon, the entry of a drone into Iranian airspace, and the denial of Iran's right to enrich uranium. This ceasefire deal is already soaked in Lebanese blood, even if there are some miraculous rescues. Israel and Iran both have their fingers on the trigger, ready should the other blink first. Diana Magnay, Sky News in northern Israel.
So over the course of a single day, President Trump went from threatening Iran with annihilation to proclaiming that Iran's leadership had presented a workable plan that led him to agree to a 2-week ceasefire. Well, in one post on Truth Social today, he said the United States will work closely with Iran, which we have determined has gone through what will be a very productive regime change. There will be no enrichment of uranium. He went on to say, we are and will be talking tariff and sanctions relief with Iran. Many of the 15 points have already been agreed to. Well, the US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth hailed the 2-week ceasefire as a real chance at peace.
We control their fate, not the other way around. That's why they came to the table. Iran's defeat is America's retribution for every American lost to Iranian terror, especially those brave troops killed by Iranian-made roadside bombs in Iraq that my generation knows so well, and for the suffering their regime has inflicted around the world. Now we have a chance at real peace and a real deal. The War Department, for now, has done its part. We stand ready in the background to ensure Iran upholds every reasonable term. And as everyone knows, nobody makes a better deal than President Trump.
Well, let's bring in our US correspondent, Mark Stone. And Mark, I know you spoke personally to Donald Trump. It's now nearly 24 hours since we were reporting that ceasefire agreement. Some of the details coming out now are extraordinary. We now know who will negotiate for the Americans in Pakistan. Some of the issues, though, like whether Hezbollah was included in the ceasefire, or indeed whether Trump might work with Iran to charge for safe passage through the Strait of Hormuz, just shows how testing all of this is ahead.
Yeah, loads of detail, loads of contradiction, loads of confusion, I think, and a ceasefire which is holding in part, is contradictory in part, and is certainly not holding when it comes to Lebanon, where it has been a horrific day, as Diana was describing. Look, President Trump last night, when he spoke to me on the phone, it was about a minute and a half, the phone call. The sort of unwritten convention of these things is that we don't broadcast it, but we can quote what he said. And I can tell you, he was upbeat at that point. He was relaxed. It was at a point in the evening where we didn't know at that stage that the Lebanese part of the ceasefire was apparently not part of the deal. The Pakistanis were saying it is part of the deal and continue to say that. But it was a point in the evening where we were confused over this 10-point plan. What did it mean? Was it a plan that was the plan the Americans were talking about, that Trump was talking to me about on the phone, the same one that the Iranians had published, the maximalist demands of the Iranian government that include being allowed to enrich uranium? uranium, controlling the Strait of Hormuz, all American troops out of the region, sanctions relief. Was Donald Trump really signing up to that? Well, no, he told me. You haven't seen the plan. The plan that I have said, I know what the points are. They are good points. We've negotiated many of them. That is what the president told me. And then Caroline Levitt today put a bit of detail on that. She said it's fake news. What the Iranians are saying publicly is fake news. An entirely different condensed plan is being discussed. So what's happening? Well, it appears that there is a gulf between the two sides. They've agreed to pause. They've agreed to talk. There is confusion over Lebanon and a 2-week pause where, at the end of which they reckon they will have a deal. But it's extremely hard, if not impossible, to see how those two sides can come together. Now, J.D. Vance is clearly key in all of this. He's been speaking on his way back from Europe. He's due in Islamabad to hold those talks at the weekend. And on Lebanon, he had this.
I actually think, and there's a lot of bad faith negotiation and a lot of bad faith, propaganda going on. I think this comes from a legitimate misunderstanding. I think the Iranians thought that the ceasefire included Lebanon, and it just didn't. We never made that promise. We never indicated that was going to be the case. What we said is that the ceasefire would be focused on Iran, and the ceasefire would be focused on America's allies, both Israel and the Gulf Arab states.
J.D. Vance there, Mark, but I know you're stood there waiting to see the NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte leave. And Silly, there's going to be a shakedown of some of the longer-term implications of this, not least Donald Trump's ire towards NATO and its allies. With the Wall Street Journal reporting tonight the prospect that there might be some punishment for NATO.
Yeah, I mean, had the ceasefire not occurred last night, I think the front and centre news right now would be the presence here of the NATO Secretary-General at a time when the NATO-America relationship, I mean, America's part of NATO, of course it is, it's the key component of NATO, but Donald Trump's rhetoric about NATO, about leaving NATO, about how NATO has let him down, he said today they were tested, NATO was tested, and they failed. He has threatened to leave the organisation because NATO didn't help him out in this war in Iran. So it's a very, very tense time, and into it comes the Secretary-General Mark Rutte, former Dutch Prime Minister, said to be a bit of a Trump whisperer. He's the man credited with talking Trump down from those threats to occupy or take over Greenland. He has been in the Oval Office for a meeting now for about 2 hours, a very long meeting. As things stand, we've no reason to believe the meeting has finished. We hope that he may come to the microphones here and talk to us afterwards. The last time he was in Washington, he did. But there's no question this is an alliance under great strain right now. The Wall Street Journal is reporting sorry, there's a bit of movement here, just having a look. The Wall Street Journal is reporting that Donald Trump is threatening, Anna, to move American troops from NATO countries which have not been helpful to other NATO countries which have been more helpful. If he does that, I think that would be a kind of symbolic move that probably wouldn't bother the alliance too much because it wouldn't impact the defensive posture and defensive capabilities of NATO because American troops would still be in Europe. They perhaps just wouldn't be in places like Spain, maybe the UK. He's pretty irritated with the UK at the moment. They would be moved to other NATO countries. So perhaps a kind of a way of sorting out a difficult issue there. But we await to hear from Mark Rutte when he emerges, if he emerges.
This may well have had a difficult conversation with Donald Trump, certainly. Mark, thank you very much indeed there outside the White House. We'll come on to NATO in a bit because we'll talk about Sir Keir Starmer, who's in the Gulf region. But first of all, clearly this ceasefire is extremely fragile because of what we've seen in Lebanon today. Already we know Iran's parliament speaker tonight has said 3 key clauses of the 10-point proposal were violated before the start of negotiations on Friday. The Foreign Minister Aragci said the Iran-US ceasefire terms are clear and explicit. The US must choose ceasefire or continued war via Israel. It cannot have both. This is difficult times, is it not?
It feels like everything's just absolutely on a knife edge about whether this is going to end up in total collapse. And of course, the main purpose of this, which is to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, to try and get global energy traffic moving again. that also isn't working because those 2,000 ships, they remain stranded. You know, insurers are not prepared to let them risk going through while the ceasefire is so fragile. So that even the sort of original aim of this is not having any effect.
Yes, and Iran's press TV has been speaking exactly about that tonight, saying the Strait of Hormuz has been fully closed, forcing oil tankers to turn back. And then it went on to say that Iran Ports and Maritime Organization says that the passage through the Strait of Hormuz must be done in coordination with Iran's Revolutionary Guards. There is no way that Donald Trump will sign up to that, and that's not what he meant by the ceasefire that was announced nearly 24 hours ago.
Well, no. I mean, this entire situation is an utter mess in the sense that no side even seems to agree on what was agreed just 24 hours ago. So
yes, 10-point, 15-point. I mean, we don't even know how many numbers.
There's even two versions of the 10-point plan. So you call that a 20-point plan, add another 15 on. No one's got any idea what has actually been agreed behind the scenes, who is negotiating or speaking in good faith here publicly to the media, and these claims of secret plans that were agreed behind closed doors, which are now being rejected publicly. I think the important thing to remember here is that they've agreed a 2-week negotiating window, and we're well used to Donald Trump's negotiating style going right up to the last minute. But if there's 2 weeks to negotiate this highly complex deal, we're not even out of the starting blocks at this point. It's hard to see how they're ever going to be able to come to an agreement when they don't even know where they're starting. Yes,
and certainly, you know, again, the accusations fly. Donald Trump, for example, saying imports from countries supplying Iran with military weapons will face immediate 50% tariffs with no exceptions, you know, effectively warning China and Russia against restocking Tehran's military inventories during this 2-week pause, should it come to that. Yes, The Guardian picks up specifically on that point, in fact. We will have a full look at the new newspapers at past the hour. But the fragile ceasefire at risk, they say, as Israel bombards Lebanon, which was our lead story tonight. So we mentioned Sir Keir Starmer. Britain has reiterated that the government's key goal is to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. Sir Keir, speaking from a visit to Saudi Arabia, said he welcomed the ceasefire but acknowledged there is still a lot of work to do.
It's early days. There is a real sense, I think, of relief. You could feel it at the base here in Saudi Arabia. For 39 days, they've been acting in our collective self-defence. You can feel the relief. But what they want to know, what people in the United Kingdom want to know, who will share that relief, is that this needs to be permanent. And it's our job to work with other countries in the region, not only on the cessation of hostilities, but also on opening the Strait of Hormuz, because the impact on our energy prices, you can see it on a daily basis over the last 39 days. It's our job to make sure that the Strait is open, that we're able to get the energy that the world needs out and stabilise the prices back in the United Kingdom. So I say, we're not getting drawn into this war. We've always acted in collective self-defence, but my job is to protect the UK lives, of course, which is what we've been doing here from this base, but also to protect our interests.
Well, as I said tonight, Iran's state media said Tehran has closed the Strait of Hormuz in response to Israel's continued attacks on Lebanon. Sky's data and forensics correspondent Tom Cheshire has been looking at the marine traffic through the Strait and the impact it has on the oil market.
The ceasefire looks like very good news for the global economy. Very good news for anyone filling up at a UK petrol station. But there are the expectations and then there's reality. The reality is a little more complicated. We'll talk about that. But first of all, the good news. Oil prices have fallen. They were low before the conflict. They had this really, really big spike up here, but they are coming down. Fine. They're not as high as they were before, but they're not continued to go up. And that's also true of gas prices too, coming down now. Now, as a result of that, the market reaction was pretty positive. We saw in the US and the UK after this news a jump of 2% in respective main stock markets, but look at Japan and South Korea. Japan's up 5%, South Korea up 7%. Now that's because although we've talked about the impact in the UK and in Europe, actually Asian economies are really exposed, were really exposed, we might be saying, to this crisis because of the Strait of Hormuz. They really depend on it for their economies. And this shows traffic through that strait. When it comes to oil and gas, you can see this is pre-war levels. It dropped off here, and then you've had this sort of limited exceptions going through. Now, according to this ceasefire, the Strait of Hormuz is supposed to be open. So What is the reality here versus the expectation? Well, in the hours afterwards, we've been looking at this on marine traffic, and through all the ships that used to go through here, we've only seen 2 go through it. And look where they've gone through. They've gone through very close on the Iranian side of the strait, not where they used to go. We'll lay that out a bit more clearly. This is how it usually works, the Strait of Hormuz here. This is the normal shipping lanes here in red. This one, the dotted green line here, that is the Iranian-controlled route, and that's so they can get up really close and have a visual inspection of the ships. What that actually looks like, well, this was on Tuesday, and what this shows is a tanker here. This is satellite imagery, and just bear with me. This is a tanker going through Iranian-controlled waters. We've spotted what looked like 2 speedboats going to inspect that vessel. Now, given how dangerous these waters are, it's likely these are Iranian vessels, perhaps IRGC vessels going to inspect that tanker. So that's the sort of level of control they've been having through the strait. Are they going to maintain that level of control? Well, we had this temporary ceasefire broken, and we had statements from Donald Trump on the left and also from Iran's foreign ministry on the right. We don't need to read all of those. Let's pick out the bits about the strait in itself. Donald Trump saying he was talking about the complete, immediate and safe opening of the strait. And what we had from Iran's foreign minister was a bit more considered. For a period of 2 weeks, safe passage through the Strait of Hormuz will be possible via coordination with Iran's armed forces and with due consideration of technical limitations. 2 really important bits there. Armed forces, Iran still in control according to their foreign minister, and with due consideration of technical limitations. That suggests these gates aren't just going to open, everyone's going to go through. This is going to be a slow process. So what does that mean for us? Well, fuel prices likely to remain high for some time. This shows how they've been going over the years. We're still not at the levels of 2022, that big ascent. We've got diesel here in black, by the way. We're a lot more reliant on imports for diesel. It's gone up more than petrol has here in green. That is likely going to take a while to filter through. And the same for shipping. So this is freight rates, the cost of shipping. We saw it really go up with this conflict. Again, we've seen it drop with this news. It's going to take a while to filter through. There's lots of ships blocked up. Again, all of this is contingent on the ceasefire being announced, the ceasefire being kept. The nature of a ceasefire is that it is uncertain. It's not a full peace deal. So even this is all contingent. Reality is still messy.
Tom Cheshire. Well, let's go back to Sir Keir Starmer, who has met the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman in Jeddah, meeting the Saudi leader as he visited Gulf allies to discuss efforts to cement that fragile ceasefire, no doubt to also, thank those who've protected the allies in the region. But also asked Jessica whether his relationship with the US president was in tatters, to which he said, "I've acted as you expect of a British Prime Minister." But this has been hard for him, hasn't it, don't you think?
It's definitely been a particular choice of his to break with the US president in such a fashion. And one I think he hopes, firstly, is almost certainly what he actually genuinely believes he should have done, and to stay out of this war and to only allow British bases to be used in a defensive capacity. But also, politically, he is calculating that Donald Trump is so unpopular, particularly amongst his own voters, that a break with Trump is not such a bad thing in terms of the eyes of the British public, many of whom, will watch what's unfolding in Washington and fear that the US is being led by someone who's quite in control of themselves.
Yes, and as we look at the backwash, as I put it, of the implications of all of this, military weakness of the UK is possibly one thing that's really been thrown into sharp focus. I see that Kemi Badenoch will be giving a speech calling for the government to publish the long-delayed UK defence investment plan next week, calling its absence a national scandal. So what are we expecting to hear from her, and why don't we know what we're going to spend on our defence?
Well, that defence investment plan has been long delayed. It was meant to be published in the autumn last year, and we still haven't got it. As far as we can tell, the reason for that is the government still doesn't know where it's going to get the money to invest in what its own strategic defence review said the British military should be able to do. What Kemi Badenoch's going to say later on this week is that the Tories will give Labour any votes that they need to get through any kind of spending cuts so that they can fund the rearmament of Britain. That's basically saying to the Prime Minister, don't worry about your Labour rebels, don't worry about the backbenchers, we'll help it over the line. But of course, it would be very embarrassing for a Labour Prime Minister to have to rely on Tory votes to get anything like that through. if they even knew what they were going to do, which it doesn't seem at the moment that they do.
Very interesting, yes. And we've got, one Type 45 frigate which has had to go back for more repairs, which was delayed in going in the first place. But, it'll be interesting to see who else Sakir meets on this visit to the Gulf.
Yes, and of course I think these feel like the relationships that he really wants to shore up. It was apparently in the early days of the war, real tensions between Britain and the Gulf states about, the expectation of how Iran would retaliate and how, those alliances didn't seem to deliver them any particular protection. So he is having to go there and talk to them and sort of smooth over those relationships. It seems like he's prioritising those over smoothing over his relationship with the American president.
Yes, very interesting. Well, we'll see how it all unfolds in the next few days. Islamabad, the next focus. We know that J.D. Vance is heading there as part of the US delegation, which includes Steve Witkoff, who's been at presumably most meetings. The talks, I think, are on Saturday. In the meantime, let us move on. And a woman dubbed the Ketamine Queen, who admitted selling Matthew Perry the drugs that killed him, has been sentenced to 15 years in prison. Jasveen Sangha is one of 5 defendants who pleaded guilty in connection with the overdose of the Friends actor in 2023. Well, let's bring in our US correspondent, Martha Kellner, there. So tell us about this woman, Martha, and her role in the death of Matthew Perry.
Yeah, Jasveen Sangha is a 42-year-old woman. She's known, or she was known to her customers as the Ketamine Queen because of the drugs that she sold, and she's been sentenced to 15 years in prison for her role in the death of Matthew Perry. Perry, of course, best known for his role as Chandler Bing in the TV series Friends. He was found dead in a hot tub in his home here in Los Angeles in October 2023, and court documents show that Jasveen Sangha, the woman who was on your screen just then, that she supplied Matthew Perry with 50 vials of ketamine in the lead-up to his death, including that fatal dose. She pleaded guilty to 5 federal charges that carried a maximum sentence of 65 years in prison, although the prosecution had only sought 15 years, which is exactly what she received. Matthew Perry's mother, Suzanne, and his father, Keith Morrison, were inside that courtroom as the sentence was handed down. Here is what Keith had to say.
Look, you'd have to have a heart of stone to wake up every morning and make a business out of feeding off the addictions of vulnerable people who are desperate for drugs. Then when you're forced to, confront what you have done, if you don't feel some sense of shame or sorrow, then you're not even human. And she is clearly human. She is now facing her sentence, and I think she'll do fine in prison.
Jasveen Sangha had originally pleaded not guilty to those charges. She changed her plea to guilty when her trial was just weeks away. Her sentence is the harshest handed down to any of these defendants, 5 defendants in this case so far. Her lawyer, her defence lawyer, Mark Garagos, said that he was bitterly disappointed by the sentence. He said there's no way that Jasveen is 5 times more culpable than the person who injected Matthew Perry with the drug or the doctor who got the drug. He said that the sentence was absurd in the literal meaning of the word. As that sentence was handed down, Jasveen Sangha cried. She also expressed her remorse. She said that she would do better in the future, adding that she'd given herself no other choice.
Martha, thank you. Yes, and Sangha telling the judge that she wears her shame like a jacket. These were not mistakes, they were horrible decisions which shattered people's lives and the lives of their family and friends. Tony, I know you were in America and on duty on the night that Matthew Perry was so shockingly found dead.
I was, yeah, and there's 2 things I remember about it, really. The first one just being the sort of shock of any massive celebrity death that you hear about, someone that everyone watched on TV for years. The second thing, almost immediately, this kind of bizarre and shady world of celebrity drug dealing that started to come through, and you heard about these various characters in LA and how it all unfolded, and this name, Jasveen Sangha, came up pretty soon after his death was first reported. That obviously, this process has taken a long time, and we now get a sentence. But I think when you look at what happened in court today, you do get an interesting insight into how these drugs are procured, who takes them, why they take them. It's an unusual and murky world that we don't usually get any insight into.
Yes, and prosecutors securing the exact sentence they asked for after casting Sanger as a ketamine queen who had an elaborate drug operation, of which you were describing there, catering to high-end clients to give herself a jet-setting lifestyle. So, this is her paying the price. She's been in jail, I think, since her August 2024 indictment.
Quite an interesting argument seems to have been going on amongst the lawyers about why she should have got the longest sentence versus, the others in the case. And it was argued, should the person who effectively supplied the ammunition get more than the person who pulled the trigger? But it was, the counter argument to that is that she had this huge business, she had this huge industry, this big base of celebrity clients, and that was a bigger crime than simply being the assistant who helped their boss inject the drug.
OK, Jessica, Tony, thank you very much indeed. Lots more still to come on our programme, including a full look at what is making the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers.
What's the best thing about being a Sky News journalist?
Who's funnier?
Being a Sky News journalist.
A special edition of The World with me, Yalda Hakim.
Pakistan has the right to respond.
You're like, what?
Historic day here today. Congratulations, this is a huge moment. But what happens now?
But it is time now to see what is making the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers. Let's start with The Guardian, which reports that the ceasefire is at risk as Israel continues to bombard Lebanon. The Times leads with a similar headline: airstrikes risk blowing apart a fragile ceasefire. That is also the front two of the Financial Times, which says the Israeli strikes threatened the truce. The Daily Mirror claims a war of words is still going on amid confusion over the ceasefire deal. And the front of the Metro asks, after 40 days of chaos, is it really peace? Oil over bar the shouting, their headline. Daily Mail focuses on Iran's decision to continue charging ships to pass through the Strait of Hormuz. But the Eye says UK Mine Hunter drones will protect oil in the strait. The Telegraph reports Putin has mocked Starmer in the Channel as Russian warships escort oil tankers through UK waters in defiance of the Prime Minister's threat. The Sun reports on the growing cost of living crisis here at home in the UK, despite the ceasefire being struck between the US and Iran. Meantime, the Daily Express headline reads Destination El Dorado UK, reporting that French police watch on as migrants set off in Channel boats. The Daily Star focuses on this weekend's Grand National with the headline Red Rum Rides Again. So let's kick off with The Guardian then, shall we, Jessica? And, the real concern witnessed in Lebanon today. 100 attacks in 10 minutes is what it was described as. Prime Minister Netanyahu suggesting it's the biggest attack since the pagers went off, if you remember, in the hands of Hezbollah people.
Yeah, I mean, huge numbers of casualties today, killing at least 250 people, wounding more than 800 people, and just those huge scenes of devastation. It really does make a mockery of the idea of it's been a ceasefire when you can see images like that, images that we've been seeing across Sky News for the last hour or so, that there could be, really truly be a ceasefire when such a bombardment is going on, and how, there seems to be the mother of misunderstandings, if that truly was the case, when the ceasefire was brokered, about whether it should include Lebanon or not.
Yes, J.D. Vance, the US Vice President departing Europe, suggested it was a genuine misunderstanding, that Iran thought it was included, that Israel would cease attacking Hezbollah in Lebanon. But that was not the case. And Netanyahu saying today it was him that asked for it not to be included. Clearly, they feel they have work to do there.
Well, yes, and it's worth saying that the Prime Minister of Pakistan, who helped broker this deal, has also said that Israel's attacks on Lebanon were included as part of the peace deal. But clearly there's a huge amount of confusion over what exactly was agreed. And it's also worth saying that this attack, according to Israel, has been in the works for some time, and they're again looking at more attacks further into Beirut. So it doesn't seem to be the end of this particular round of attacks.
Yes, Netanyahu saying we continue to target them forcefully, meaning Hezbollah. In the meantime, the suggestion that Iran has opened or continues to operate this shipping toll booth system as part of this peace deal. In fact, actually closing the Strait of Hormuz again, forcing ships to go round what is a small island, actually, right towards the Iranian border, away from the Omani border. And then Donald Trump even suggesting at one point that he could do a deal with Iran where America and Iran jointly charge vessels for going through this strait.
It feels like we hear a changing story about how the strait is going to be reopened, how long it will take to reopen, and who might charge for reopening it sort of every 5 minutes. And at the moment, the Iranians have this kind of makeshift system where they assess the ships going through. I think there's a tiny, tiny number going through compared to normal 150 or so that would pass that strait. 2,000 been stuck there since the beginning of the war. That's 20,000 seafarers who would usually man those vessels. And of course, it's completely gumming up global energy supplies, while Donald Trump and the Iranians seem to be now thinking about having some sort of joint toll for ships passing. It's extraordinary.
Yeah, and The Sun, which has long campaigned against fuel duty, obviously, suggesting that drivers have been warned to expect ongoing misery at the fuel pumps as Iran threatened to charge tankers passing through the Strait of Hormuz. The Metro, though, is talking about, energy prices falling as the world welcomes the deal. I mean, it was really on the Asian markets who've been massively hit, haven't they? Because they take a lot of their energy from the Strait of Hormuz and the Persian Gulf.
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, the stock markets and, the European stock markets and in America today have been up and down as traders are trying to work out what exactly is going on. But I think for a lot of our papers, they're focused on how it's going to hit drivers at the pumps, and that, for many voters, many people in our country, will be the way that this war is impacting them the most. The effects are clearly very significant.
Yes, I've got the Mirror, page 5 here. Israeli intelligence furious over the deal. I don't know if you've got that, because I don't think I have. Yes, let's have a look at that then. Yeah, that's the one. We'll find it between us, shall we? So, yes, Netanyahu denied today that this surprised them and it was thrown at them and that it was in full cooperation with the Americans. But do you think, actually, fundamentally, Donald Trump was looking for a way out, an off-ramp, that he boxed himself into such a corner with his rhetoric that he had to seek a way out?
Well, there's that acronym, isn't there, that they use in the American press, which is Trump Taco, which is Trump always chickens out. And in many ways, that's, over the course of this war, the fact that he has not gone through with some of his threats has been a great relief to the rest of the world after some of the threats to annihilate a whole civilization that we were hearing around this time yesterday. But, of course, it felt like there was a certain urgency for this deal, and the Israelis, it sounds like, were told, you have to take this, and this is what's happening. And their response has been to continue that bombardment of Lebanon.
Yes, the French President, Emmanuel Macron, has said he's just spoken to the Lebanese President and the Lebanese Prime Minister and has condemned the Israeli strikes on Lebanon in the strongest possible terms, reiterating the need to preserve Lebanon's territorial integrity. And clearly, the idea of a buffer zone in the south up to the Litani River is in the sights of Israel now, in their desperation to stop rockets being fired into northern Israel.
That's right. I mean, if you needed any illustration that this is a war being fought on multiple fronts between multiple states, some of which has been going on since October 7th, then that's it. But I think on the point about Donald Trump, it is very difficult from the outside to decipher what exactly is going on here, because he does oscillate wildly between these promises of world peace and some of the most extreme threats of violence you would ever see a world leader make. And that's part of his negotiating strategy. Working out what's really going on behind the scenes is obviously incredibly difficult. And the truth, as always, is somewhere in the middle, and we'll probably only ever find out right at the end.
Yeah. Let's talk about the eye, shall we now? The Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, we know, has travelled to the Gulf. The eye tells us he's stepping up work on reopening the Gulf oil and gas shipping routes, but also talks about UK mine hunter drones are ready and able to protect oil through the Strait of Hormuz. Now, this was put to Caroline Levitt, wasn't it, the President's press secretary, and it led to the whole point about criticising NATO and its allies, that they were asked and they were found wanting. So slightly dismissive of allied support to try and keep the Strait of Hormuz open now.
Well, this kind of oscillates as well, doesn't it? Because only a few days ago, Donald Trump was saying, you need to come and get your oil. If you want this reopened, then you have to come and help reopen it. And we won't be. There was even talk that the Americans might just abandon it and leave it for the rest of the world to clear up that strait as soon as it became safe. At the moment, we're a long way off it being cleared up, because it's still considered, by insurers, by shipping experts, too hot for them to go in there and start clearing it. But that might start to change over the course of the next couple of days. So then the UK is part of this coalition of around 35 countries who have promised that they will send resources to try and help clear the strait. And we might start to see the beginnings of that. But it feels hard to hope or pin any certainty on any of those things while things remain so fragile.
Yes, and we know that the UK government has said it will board or promise to board Russian vessels going through the Channel. Daily Telegraph, Putin mocks Starmer in the Channel. Russian warship now escorting oil tankers through UK waters in defiance of the Prime Minister's promise to board these vessels. I mean, this is working with impunity, surely, now.
Well, yeah, I mean, as you say, the UK has promised that it'll start boarding these vessels. In the meantime, the vessels have continued coming through, and now we've got a warship in the Channel. Our reporter today on a fishing boat in the Channel watched this exchange happen, watched the Royal Navy auxiliary vessel watching these two ships coming past. The first one a massive Russian shadow fleet oil tanker, the second a Russian warship, operating just 10 miles off the coast of Dover. I mean, pretty extraordinary scenes there, and also something that if you want any comparison here between the way that the US and the UK deals with these things, just imagine what would happen if there was a Russian warship operating 10 miles off the coast of Florida. I would imagine with Trump in the White House, you'd see it blast out of the sea pretty quickly. That's certainly not the approach that Keir Starmer is taking, and this is all the evidence you need.
Yes, the specialist US Coast Guard dropping onto vessels off the coast of Venezuela live long in the memory at that point, don't they? Let's rattle through as many as we can now, because we haven't got very long. First of all, doctors' strikes and what Kemi Badenoch would do about them.
Yes, so, I mean, on the page in the Metro, there's the Tory leader said that she would actually ban doctors from going on strike. They're starting their strike. They started on Tuesday, and she said that they're betraying the patients that its members swore to serve. And she said that she would intervene, make this new law to stop doctors from going on strike. That's already the case, of course, for some sort of emergency services like the police, the armed forces. They're not allowed to go on strikes, and they want to reintroduce something that the Tories introduced and Labour scrapped, which was these minimum service levels. So still no sign of really any agreement between the government and these striking doctors.
Yes, and that strike continues, obviously. Well, the Daily Telegraph tells us that nearly half of 999 patients taken to A&E do not actually need hospital treatment.
That's right, and it turns out that the reason for that is that people feel unable to seek help elsewhere. Of course, there is the NHS 111 service, which people can ring to get help, but it seems that there is a lack of support in other community-based health care, or at least people don't feel confident in going to those services, and therefore they turn up at A&E almost as a first resort, rather than what it should actually be, which is a last resort. A pretty stark statistic there, and you can only think what would happen to the A&E waiting times if the number of people who were in those waiting rooms was halved overnight.
Yeah, OK. Lots more of the papers coming out. We didn't quite get to the Express, Destination El Dorado. Perhaps we will next hour. Both of you stay there. Well, the UK has enjoyed, you might have noticed, its warmest day of the year so far, with the hottest temperatures for this time of year since 1946. But will it continue? We'll talk about that next.
Liberation Day.
By popular demand, here we are.
Donald Trump. It is quite the story. Wherever it goes, on Trump 100, we go with it.
Can you tell us who you're looking for?
Unbelievable we've come to this.
Are you overstating the reach and significance of this deal?
Not like you said it.
From the UK?
Why don't you go back to your country where you have a major migrant problem?
It was 10 feet from him, and all of a sudden the shot's running out.
People impacted.
I'll tell you on another day on the podcast what that was all about.
Join us wherever you get your podcast.
A lifeline for millions of people living on both sides of one of the most volatile international borders.
It's dams like these that have become inflection points between the two nuclear-armed neighbors, which could potentially lead to water wars in the future. A terror attack has shattered the peace and tranquility of Kashmir. At least 26 people have been killed and as many injured when militants fired upon them. I'm Neville Lazarus, and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi.
The old and young, all weary after being trapped for days, as the worst floods have hit Kerala in a century.
3 days we are on a rooftop. They have no food, nothing.
The roads have been inundated. The only way out is to get people by boat. There have been reported deaths and many injuries, several critical.
Many families will grapple with the unimaginable loss of one of the worst disasters in India's aviation history.
The spiraling violence between two nuclear-armed neighbors that harbor decades of hostility just seems to be getting worse by the day.
Garbage dumps like this not only threaten the lives of millions of people, but also pose a deadly consequence on the environment and climate.
It is a source of death, decay, disease and pollution for hundreds of thousands of people living in its shadows.
There is so much disease because of this garbage. Sometimes it's so difficult to just breathe.
Companies like these are helping India in its trajectory to be a serious player in space exploration. Over the next 45 days, an estimate 400 million Hindu pilgrims are expected to converge here in Prayagraj on the banks of the holy river Ganga and Yamuna. It's a real kaleidoscope of people from all walks of life.
The best thing about being a Sky News journalist?
They call him the king of the jungle.
Being a Sky News journalist.
Yusra Al-Baghir has this report.
And this is what's left of it.
As a woman of colour, how did the Harris campaign speak to you?
People risk their lives to speak to us for this report.
Mr. Zuma, Sky News.
We're trying to see as much as we can.
The best thing about being a Sky News journalist? I'm going to take you behind the scenes here for Election Night Live. They have gone up and up. Being a Sky News journalist. Ed Conway, Sky News, is anyone going to talk to us? Mortgage rates did go up very sharply during your time in office. Here it is. First off, just the scale of what we're looking at. Our data shows it's been happening. Question is, why it hasn't been stopped.
Well, it's been, you might have noticed, hotter than Ibiza in London today, with much of the country basking in the warmest April temperatures for decades. It peaked at more than 10 degrees above the seasonal average for this time of year. But will it last? Our correspondent Emma Birchley has more.
Who needs the likes of Marbella, Marrakesh or Monte Carlo when you've got this? The temperatures have been absolutely stonking. Just down the road in Kew, 26.6 degrees, which makes it not only the hottest day of the year so far, but actually the hottest April the 8th since records began, which was way back in 1884. And in fact, the hottest day of the year had been Anglesey in northwest Wales on Tuesday. They reached 24.8 degrees, kept that title for just one day. Now, Wednesday, it has been central and southern England with the hottest of the temperatures, and all of it way up above what you would expect for early April. Usually it's about 12 to 15 degrees at this time of year. And actually the timing of this warm spell couldn't be better because, of course, it's the school holidays. It sent people out and about seeking the sunshine, flocking to beaches like Weston-super-Mare in Somerset, where Mike took his family.
Come from the Midlands, just chasing the sun for a nice day on the beach. There's no beaches next to us, it's the closest place, so just come down. Some fun with the kids, something different.
We've seen all the seaside classics, from sandcastle building to donkey rides, but don't get too used to it. Certainly don't pack away the winter wardrobe, because actually by Friday, temperatures could be a good 10 degrees or more less than they are right now.
Don't depress us too quickly, Emma. Please, let's dwell in it for a moment, shall we? So 26.5 degrees at Kew Gardens. It's often one of the hottest, isn't it? Wednesday, the hottest day recorded in the first half of April since 1946, according to the Met Office, who say that temperatures even into the mid-20s are very uncommon for this time of year.
Yeah, I mean, it feels super extraordinary. I feel like I've had a direct comparison because I took my children to the beach at Weston-super-Mare yesterday, and this time last year we were at the same place visiting my in-laws, and it was absolutely freezing and pouring down with rain. So it feels extremely unusual to have such spring weather. And also it seems like it's going to be a fluke because we're soon going to return to business as usual, which is sort of grey, mid-teens sort of temperatures, aren't we?
Yeah, rain. You know, the brief respite from the rain, and that's been the problem, hasn't it? It's been a really wet winter. So what does that mean for the likes of the farmers?
Well, the farmers have got a bit of a double whammy at the moment. They had a very wet winter, which means that they are fertilising later than usual, but that has run into the fact that the fertiliser is now all very expensive because of what's going on in Iran. So the weather being all over the place is never good for the farmers. You hope maybe a couple of days of warmer weather will allow them to at least get out on the field if they've got the diesel to do it and the fertiliser to do it, which, of course, many of them don't at the moment. So a bit of a downer on the warm weather, but we should be thinking of them, I think, when we're enjoying the sunshine.
I think the farming lobby was also in Trump's ear about the war, to be fair, anyway, wasn't it? About the massive price of fertiliser, the costs coming out, because that also comes out of the Persian Gulf, doesn't it, as a byproduct. Both of you, let's take a look now, shall we, at the weather.
You're looking happy.
Well, the forecast looks good.
So you've sorted the travel insurance then?
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors Sky News Weather.
So, as we were discussing then, we had the highest temperature of the year today, but a change of wind direction will make it much cooler tomorrow. There will be a mild, fairly cloudy start tomorrow then, with prolonged rain for much of Scotland and showers for the west of Ireland, but the southeastern half of England looks sunny. England and Wales will see clouds spreading to all except the far southeast during the morning, bringing a little patchy rain to northern and western parts. Scotland, meanwhile, will see cloud and rain giving way to sunny spells and blustery showers. Goodness me, with some of them heavy, with hail and thunder, and wintry on the mountains. I feel like apologising talking about the sun. Anyway, Ireland and Northern Ireland can expect sunshine and showers throughout, and it will be cooler everywhere, although still quite warm in the southeast. So England and Wales, then we'll see clouds and what little rain there is clearing to the southeast later, with showers moving in behind. Scotland, Ireland and Northern Ireland, meanwhile, will be showery into the evening. Friday will start mostly fine, but western parts will turn wet and windy. It will be rather cool again, and I'm afraid for the weekend, more rain is on the way.
All Clear Travel Insurance proudly sponsors Sky News Weather.
So coming up in the next hour, we will be talking about the very latest on the ceasefire, with confusion tonight about certain elements of it. Namely, Iran has once again insisted that the Strait of Hormuz has been closed, that coming out on national television, and also confusion about Lebanon as well, with the Israelis insistent that Lebanon is not part of the ceasefire agreement. Donald Trump has been meeting Mark Rutte, the Secretary-General of NATO. We know that Donald Trump's ire towards his allies and indeed NATO is very strong. Certainly we heard earlier from Caroline Levitt. I know Mr. Trump looks forward to having a very frank and candid conversation with him, suggesting that Britain and other NATO allies had turned their backs. They were tested and they failed. In the meantime, Israel has continued to target Lebanon. The hardest attacks today since the pagers went off in the hands of Hezbollah. 100 targets in 10 minutes, with Netanyahu promising to continue to target them forcefully. More in the next hour.
What's the best thing about being a Sky News presenter?
We've done the work and the reading, so you don't have to.
Being a Sky News presenter.
Hello and welcome. Westminster, the heart of British politics.
I'm so sorry about what happened to you. So what on earth is going on?
It's not true.
Can I tell you what I think? It's really unusual. Mornings with Roger and Frost. Let's crack on. Let's get started.
What's the best thing about being a Sky News journalist?
Who's funnier?
Being a Sky News journalist.
A special edition of The World with me, Yalda Hakim.
Pakistan had the right to respond.
You're like, what?
A historic day here today. Congratulations, this is a huge moment.
But what happens now?
Tonight on The Wrap, ceasefire, what ceasefire? 100 targets in 10 minutes. Israel launches a massive wave of strikes on Lebanon, killing more than 250 and injuring hundreds more. Israel's Prime Minister insists the war is not over, despite the ceasefire. Iran's celebrations short-lived following the bombardment, with Tehran threatening a regretful response unless attacks against Lebanon cease. In the US, Donald Trump claims a complete victory in a call with Sky News, a sentiment echoed by his defense secretary.
President Trump forged this moment. Iran begged for this ceasefire, and we all know it.
Starmer travels to the Gulf, saying there's still a lot of work to do to secure a permanent end to the hostilities. Plus, making the most of it. Much of Britain basks in temperatures of more than 25 degrees, but there's a return to cooler conditions on the way. And a real-life canine catastrophe. The RSPCA denies using AI after it releases this image of dozens of neglected dogs crammed into a single property. Well, we discuss the day's biggest stories with Tony Diver, political editor of the Daily Telegraph, and Jessica Elgott, deputy political editor of The Guardian, plus a first look at the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers, including concerns for the fragile ceasefire in the Middle East. Well, hello and good evening to you. Jessica, Tony, welcome to you both as well. So what a difference 24 hours makes. As we came on air last night, Donald Trump was threatening to destroy a civilization and then an 11th hour deal between the US and Iran for a 2-week ceasefire. A couple of hours after that, the US president was on the phone to Sky News, hailing it as a great deal. But it seems Israel had unfinished business. Its military today launching its largest coordinated strike on Lebanon, killing more than 250 people. Iran says this was not what was agreed and is threatening a regret-inducing response. Well, Jessica, Tony, amongst all the difficulties that lie ahead with the ceasefire, this continued bombardment of Lebanon will surely be high up there.
Yes, and one of the most aggressive days we've seen in the war, 250 casualties, as you were saying, you know, hundreds of bombs in just 10 minutes over the course of the day. It was supposed to be the first day of the ceasefire. It feels incredibly symbolic for that to happen, you know, within hours of the ceasefire being agreed, and what appears to be, you know, at the very least, a miscommunication about whether the ceasefire deal included Lebanon. J.D. Vance saying in the last few hours just, you know, that it was never meant to include it. But Pakistan, the country that brokered the ceasefire, saying that it was meant to.
Yes, Tony.
Yeah, I mean, I think as so often in this conflict, it feels like we've got whiplash. There was no ceasefire, then there was a ceasefire, now it's broken down again. There is this huge debate over whether or not the Lebanon conflict was ever included in the ceasefire, but in some ways it doesn't really matter. Iran has now said that the Strait of Hormuz is closed again, we can't get any ships through, and therefore, for people at home, the war continues and the effects that they feel continue as well.
Well, the Israeli attacks on Lebanon, specifically for them, on Iran-backed Hezbollah, were the biggest since the war began, with, as we've said, 100 targets hit in just 10 minutes. Tonight, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said he had insisted that Hezbollah was not part of the ceasefire deal, saying we continue to strike them forcefully. From northern Israel, let's hear from our international correspondent, Diana Magnin.
Massive destruction in the heart of Beirut, in the centre and the west of the city, bustling residential and commercial districts, not just the southern suburbs, the Hezbollah strongholds, though they've been hit too. Is anyone in there, a man calls out, hoping for signs of life beneath this rubble, great piles of it. 100 targets hit across Beirut, the eastern Bekaa Valley and the country's south, all in the space of 10 minutes. Israel's largest attack since the start of the war and weeks in the planning.
I've said temporary ceasefire with Iran wouldn't include Hezbollah, and we continue to strike them with all our might. Today, we've dealt them the biggest blow suffered since the pages. We have attacked 100 targets in 10 minutes in places they were certain were immune and bulletproof.
And there are significant civilian casualties. How could there not be with this amount of firepower and no prior warning? Hundreds killed, more than 1,000 wounded.
It's a crime after a crime. They are martyrs. God bless them. What can we do? We are doing our duty. This is a crime. The state has to do something.
This is a separate skirmish, Donald Trump has said, of Israel's fight with Hezbollah, not part of the deal he'd struck. But Iran wanted the guns to stop with this war too, and will be weighing its response. For Israel to hit Lebanon this hard at this point suggests that it is trying to inflict maximum damage on Hezbollah while it still can and before it is forced to stop. We're 10 kilometres from the border here. This is one of those northern communities that has seen its fair share of Hezbollah strikes. And it is towns like this that Israel has said that it is determined to protect at seemingly any cost.
You are looking at this one.
Okay.
Okay, and we are somewhere else.
Sarit Zehavi runs a centre which focuses on the security challenges on Israel's northern border. She thinks Israel is right to press on.
We are tired of wars. We want to make sure that this time something will truly change.
Are you prepared to have the war with Iran ongoing if it means that you can keep fighting Hezbollah?
We are prepared to defend ourselves as much as it takes.
But these don't look much like defensive strikes, whatever Israel says. And Iran is taking note. The Speaker of the Parliament posting that negotiations were unreasonable with 3 of their key conditions unmet: the ceasefire in Lebanon, the entry of a drone into Iranian airspace, and the denial of Iran's right to enrich uranium. This ceasefire deal is already soaked in Lebanese blood, even if there are some miraculous rescues. Israel and Iran both have their fingers on the trigger, ready should the other blink first. Diana Magnay, Sky News in northern Israel.
Well, it's certainly leading a number of newspapers, including your own, about the fragility of the ceasefire, given the bombardment with Israel. Fragile ceasefire at risk as Israel bombards Lebanon. And this genuine confusion that J.D. Vance has been talking about this misunderstanding. But as far as Iran is concerned, this is desperately serious. They've now closed the Strait of Hormuz until something is done about it.
Yeah, and I think you might start to see more pressure come from other world leaders. We've just seen from Emmanuel Macron of France talking about that the ceasefire deal should include Lebanon. If that starts to spread across other European leaders and them intervene in that fashion, then again, that puts more pressure on the Israelis, on the Americans to insist that that becomes part of this deal. They have this 2-week period to negotiate, but of course that was supposed to mean some relief for the Strait of Hormuz. We're not seeing that, and that's not meaning that the global economy is not getting the relief that it needs.
Yes, Emmanuel Macron has spoken to the Lebanese president and the Lebanese prime minister and has condemned in the strongest possible terms Israel's continued attacks on Lebanon. Iran's parliament speaker says 3 key clauses of a 10-point proposal were violated before the start of negotiations at the end of this week on Saturday, is our understanding. And the Iranian foreign minister said the Iran-US ceasefire terms are clear and explicit. The US must choose ceasefire or continued war via Israel. It cannot have both. So what happens with this fragile moment if Israel still has unfinished business in Lebanon?
Well, there's obviously some debate about what was actually in that agreement and what the 10 points were, whether there are 2 versions of the 10-point deal or a 15-point deal or whatever it is that's being negotiated. I think it's also worth saying, though, that Iran was reported to have broken the ceasefire deal just hours after it was agreed last night with a drone attack on a Saudi oil pipeline travelling across the region, one of the only ways, actually, of getting oil out of the Gulf if you don't use the Strait of Hormuz. So that is a kind of vital lifeline to Saudi customers, which is under threat from Iran. So there are violations or attempts at violations on both sides here. But how exactly you start to come to an agreement about what's going to happen next when you can't even agree on what's been agreed, I think, is a real problem for these negotiators. And I think, as we always see with negotiations in which Donald Trump is a participant, we will see them run right up to the wire, and it won't be clear what's actually been agreed until right at the very end.
Yes, certainly over a single day. Yesterday, President Trump went from threatening Iran with annihilation to having a ceasefire, a workable ceasefire with them, proclaiming that Iran's leadership had produced a plan that he could work with. So let's take a look then at one of his Truth Social posts from today. There we go. He said the United States will work closely with Iran, which we have determined has gone through what will be a very productive regime change. There will be no enrichment of uranium. You've got the next page. There it is. There will be no enrichment of uranium. We are and will be talking tariff and sanctions relief with Iran. Many of the 15 points have already been agreed to. So we've gone from 10 points to 15 points to continue to our confusion. And which of them have been agreed to? Because some of them are really extraordinary, including what to do about the Strait of Hormuz. Certainly Iran seemed to be suggesting that it would continue to charge vessels going through there. At one point, splitting the money with Oman. And then Donald Trump wades in and says, well, he'll do a deal with Iran and they'll all charge and it'll be a beautiful thing. So, I mean, there's a lot of confusion.
And some of the points, it should be said that the Iranians presented and said the Americans had agreed to were, you know, ludicrous to the point of parody, saying that they would agree to lift all sanctions, pay reparations, rebuild Iran and enrich uranium. So, you know, it feels very much like we are extremely unclear still about what the points of those ceasefire and what these negotiators who will meet later this weekend are even working on from a baseline.
Yes, well, certainly we've heard the US Defence Secretary and Donald Trump as well, to our correspondent Mark Stone, talking about capital V for victory. Pete Hegseth hailing the 2-week ceasefire a real chance at peace.
We control their fate, not the other way around. That's why they came to the table. Iran's defeat is America's retribution for every American lost to Iranian terror, especially those brave troops killed by Iranian-made roadside bombs in Iraq that my generation knows so well, and for the suffering their regime has inflicted around the world. Now we have a chance at real peace and a real deal. The War Department, for now, has done its part. We stand ready in the background to ensure Iran upholds every reasonable term. And as everyone knows, nobody makes a better deal than President Trump.
Well, Britain has been reiterating the government's key goal is to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. Keir Starmer, who's been speaking from a visit to Saudi Arabia, said he welcomed the ceasefire but acknowledged there's still a lot of work to do.
It's early days. There is a real sense, I think, of relief. You could feel it at the base here in Saudi Arabia. For 39 days, they've been acting in our collective self-defence. You can feel the relief. But what they want to know, what people in the United Kingdom want to know, who will share that relief, is that this needs to be permanent. And it's our job to work with other countries in the region, not only on the cessation of hostilities, but also on opening the Strait of Hormuz, because the impact on our energy prices, you can see it on a daily basis over the last 39 days. It's our job to make sure that the strait is open, that we're able to get the energy that the world needs out and stabilise the prices back in the United Kingdom. So I say, we're not getting drawn into this war. We've always acted in collective self-defence, but my job is to protect the UK lives, of course, which is what we've been doing here from this base, but also to protect our interests.
And we've been told this evening that Sir Keir Starmer has met Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman in Jeddah and has said the UK continues to work as a steadfast ally to Saudi Arabia, one of the many Gulf nations that has come under attack. I mean, I'm intrigued by this visit. Was it always on the cards? Did he only go because there was a ceasefire? Was he sitting on the tarmac waiting to see what would happen? Do we know?
Well, I think as far as we understand it, that this was a very lately confirmed visit that was intended for some days at least, but, you know, has obviously was contingent on whether Donald Trump was going to follow through with his threats as of last night, which was to annihilate an entire civilization. I don't know, but I highly doubt that Keir Starmer's visit to the region would have gone ahead if something of that nature had been unleashed. And clearly, once the ceasefire was confirmed, they decided to go ahead with that trip to the Gulf, starting there in Saudi Arabia.
And so what is the intention then, you know, with it? I mean, visiting some of the Gulf nations, I mean, once British protectorates, obviously, I mean, the Saudis has often been quoted as a close ally of the UK and the US.
Yeah, well, I think part of it's having a presence in the region, actually, because if you look at the way that the diplomatic picture has unfolded over the course of this war, the UK has become a peripheral voice. And that's partly because we don't have the kind of military hardware that a lot of the other players have got, especially the US. It's partly because we've pushed Washington away and pushed Donald Trump away, and therefore we've lost the agency that we used to have via the US. And so I think part of the message of Keir Starmer going to the region is to say, hello, I'm still here. The voice of the UK matters, and especially when it teams up with France and Germany and those other European allies that Keir Starmer has been talking to. And when the hostilities come to an end, he would like to have a role in deciding what happens with the Strait of Hormuz and perhaps policing traffic through it. So I think it's partly an attempt to show that Britain is still engaged in this conflict, even if not in a military way.
And certainly he was asked whether his relationship with the US president was in tatters. He's, via Caroline Levitt, the White House press secretary, has been, very rude about NATO again, suggesting they were found wanting. We know Mark Rutte, the NATO Secretary General, has been at the White House this evening. Does it matter if the relationship is in tatters? How does he rebuild back that relationship?
Well, it certainly feels like it is. And whether that's a bad thing for Keir Starmer domestically is another question. I think it's always a problem internationally that the UK and the US, have poor relations because we rely on the US so much for intelligence, for defence. We really have, we don't have the same kind of independent nuclear deterrent as France does. So that is important. But of course, with such an unreliable and chaotic president, obviously that relationship is going to be on shaky ground. And you have to remember that Donald Trump has launched an extreme volley of insults towards Keir Starmer, saying he's not quite Churchill, insulting the British military, saying it's all, the aircraft carriers he offered were like toys and he didn't want them anyway. So, half of this, which Downing Street says, was never even offered anyway and never rejected and so on and so forth. So because of this kind of verbal spillage coming out of the White House, of course the relationship is going to suffer from that.
Yes, well, Caroline Levitt said they were tested and they failed. It's quite sad that NATO turned their backs on the American people over the course of the last 6 weeks, when it's the American people who have been funding their defence. And the Wall Street Journal tonight is suggesting it goes further than that Trump is weighing up punishing certain NATO countries over the lack of their support over the Iran war. For example, the Wall Street Journal says moving troops out of NATO member countries deemed unhelpful, stationing them in supportive countries. So they could be closing, for example, a US base, potentially in at least one European country, and the Wall Street Journal naming possibly Spain or Germany. Has been very critical of Spain and their lack of effort. So, and also talking about pulling out of NATO again. So, is this part of the fallout, do you think, of this Iran conflict, is what happens with NATO once more?
I think it is. I think the Trump presidency is really testing the fundamentals of what NATO is about. NATO is about collective security and collective defence. But the way that it works is that all other members come to the aid of a NATO member who is physically under attack. And that isn't what's happened in this Iran conflict. Donald Trump has decided to launch an attack on Iran. He's expected NATO countries to wade in behind him. That isn't how the alliance is necessarily meant to work. The alliance works when one country is attacked. It is a defensive, not offensive organisation. That's not Donald Trump's understanding of it. And therefore, he's found the response of other European allies lacking. I don't think that necessarily would happen with another president in the White House. There will be people sitting in Downing Street counting down until the day where Donald Trump is turfed out and replaced by whoever comes next. But I really think it's testing the real political principles that underpin this alliance and proving, actually, at the end of the day, it's the characters at the head of those nations that really run it, as opposed to working as an independent organisation.
Yes, so what about the details of this 10-point, or was it 15-point plan, according to one of Trump's Truth Social posts? Our defence and security analyst, Professor Michael Clark, looks at the stumbling blocks ahead.
Day 40 of the war could have been apocalypse now, instead of which it feels like apocalypse postponed, because both sides have agreed to a 2-week pause, a ceasefire, while they try to work something out. The Americans have submitted a 15-point set of red lines via Pakistan, which is being considered, and the Iranians have submitted a 10-point series of red lines via Pakistan, which the Americans are thinking about. And President Trump said about this 10-point Iranian series of demands that he thought it was a workable basis for negotiation. That's very curious when you consider some of the things that are in these 10 points. One thing that's in these 10 points is an Iranian demand that the Americans close their bases in the Middle East and withdraw their troops. Now, this is a view of some of the main bases, not all of them by any means, but some of the main bases in the region. There are 40,000 American troops normally in the Middle East, plus the 8,000 or so extra who have arrived there in light of this particular crisis. The chances of the United States withdrawing troops, still less closing bases, which have been open for many years, is absolutely zero. They just won't do it. Another Iranian demand is that they be allowed to maintain their civil nuclear power capacity. And they've always said this. We want to be a civil nuclear power, and they say we have no desire to develop a nuclear weapon. Now, they've been lying about that for the last 20-odd years, and presumably they'll continue lying about it. But here's the other issue. In their main nuclear plants, these three were hit by the United States, Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan, not Bushehr in the south. They were hit last year. And somewhere in the rubble of those three plants, it is believed that the Iranians have got 400 kilos of highly enriched uranium, enriched to about 60%, highly enriched uranium. It may be under the rubble of Isfahan, maybe it's under the rubble of Natanz, maybe it's been split up into 2 or 3 tranches, or maybe it is underneath Pickaxe Mountain, which was built near the Natanz plant, and it's very, very deep, very inaccessible, and it's possible that the Iranians moved their uranium into Pickaxe Mountain before the attack of June last year. Either way, the United States is not going to get its hands on this 400 kilos of highly enriched uranium, whatever it says about Iran's nuclear ambitions for the future. But of course, the most immediate issue is the Strait of Hormuz. And Donald Trump has said that these straits will be released as of today, that the straits will immediately become open to shipping. The Iranians have said, well, they will open in the next day or so. But here's the big issue. The normal channel in the Strait of Hormuz goes like that, right around the straits and then along the Iranian side of the Gulf itself. But in the last few days, those ships that they've been allowing through have had to take a different route via the toll booth. And this is where they have to go north of Larak Island and effectively pay their tolls before they get out of the Gulf again. Because in Larak Island, the Iranians can take a good look at them. They could sink them if they wanted to. They can turn them back. And today, so far, day 40, all of the ships that have left the Gulf have been going north of Larak Island. So the Iranians are still operating their restrictive policy so far. If in the coming days they go back to the traditional shipping route, that will be a relief, but it's by no means guaranteed. Donald Trump can make lots of differences in the world. He can influence many things. One thing he can't really influence is Israel's war in Lebanon. The Iranians have said that all fighting must stop. But the Israelis have made it very clear with the most extensive attacks today on Lebanon since the 28th of February that this ceasefire is not to them. They actually will carry on with their war against Hezbollah in Lebanon, whatever happens in the Iran-United States arrangements. Which leaves President Trump claiming victory. He says that we have been completely successful diplomatically on all fronts. Well, if we look at all the things that the President has said over the last few weeks about what America's aims are, and they keep changing, but if we put them all together, the fact is not one of those aims has been unambiguously achieved. And some of them are in a worse state now than they were before he started. So he can claim victory as much as he likes, but the rest of the world and quite a lot of people in America probably won't agree with that as they consider the implications in the days and weeks ahead.
Yes, and a series of drops from Iranian state media tonight read like this. Passage through the Strait of Hormuz must be done in coordination with Iran's Revolutionary Guards. Then another one, an oil tanker that tried to pass through the strait was returned back to Gulf waters. And then finally, Iran's press TV, the Strait of Hormuz has been fully closed, forcing oil tankers to turn back. So it feels like we're back to square one tonight, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that all the, you saw that movement in the markets earlier in the day, which felt that there was a real hope that something could start to move, that other nations could start to move in, clear up the strait, clear the mines. Now we're absolutely back to where we are. And, there's 20,000 people who work on these ships who are still stranded in the region and have been so since the war began. Yeah, and in terms of the international effort to keep the strait open, notwithstanding whatever deal is done about the toll booth that's operating right now, the Eye suggesting that the UK's offer is to produce mine hunter drones to protect oil in the Strait of Hormuz. We don't have much to
offer, do we? The paper saying the Iran war has exposed how the Royal Navy has been cut beyond the bone. And I know Kemi Badenoch is going to be speaking about this later this week.
That's right. I mean, Kemi Badenoch is one of many people in British politics who is arguing that Britain's military capability clearly is just not cut out for any kind of deployment which has not been planned 6 months in advance, any kind of last-minute deployment somewhere in the world, which is, of course, what the Navy is for, to deploy somewhere in the world to protect British interests and British people. She will be saying that the Tories will offer Labour any votes that they need to get through a bill in the House of Commons to cut spending from elsewhere in the budget and reallocate it to rearm Britain. Of course...
Does she mean welfare?
Well, the Tories say that that's where they think the cut should come from. Of course, Keir Starmer last year attempted to get through some of his welfare cuts. It didn't go very well. There was a huge rebellion from Labour backbenchers. But Kemi Badenoch is now saying the welfare budget should be cut again. That money should be reallocated to defence. Whether or not it will be enough now to fill what was a 28 billion black hole in the MOD's budget, surely now far larger than Treasury's reserve being drawn on every day to sustain our role in this conflict. At some point before the budget, we are going to get the Defence Investment Plan, we hope, and that will have some detail. But right now, it seems like the Treasury has still got no idea where that money is coming from.
A debate for later on this week, by the sound of it, from when Ms Badenoch does her speech. Coming up next, we will move away from all matters Iranian and talk about the shocking image of dozens of dogs some people thought was faked and that the RSPCA was forced to defend. We'll discuss that further.
The best thing about being a Sky News journalist?
They call him the king of the jungle.
Being a Sky News journalist.
Yusra Al-Baghir has this report.
And this is what's left of it.
As a woman of colour, how did the Harris campaign speak to you?
People risk their lives to speak to us for this report.
Mr. Zuma, Sky News. We're trying to see as much as we can.
The best thing about being a Sky News journalist? I'm going to take you behind the scenes here for Election Night Live. They have gone up and up. Big Sky News journalist. Ed Conway, Sky News, is anyone going to talk to us? Mortgage rates did go up very sharply during your time in office. Here it is. First off, just the scale of what we're looking at. Our data shows it's been happening. Question is, why it hasn't been stopped.
What's the best thing about being a Sky News presenter?
We've done the work and the reading, so you don't have to.
Being a Sky News presenter.
Hello and welcome. Westminster, the heart of British politics.
I'm so sorry about what happened to you. So what on earth is going on?
It's not true.
Can I tell you what I think?
It's really unusual.
Mornings with Richard Frost. Let's crack on. Let's get started.
Now, the RSPCA has denied using AI-generated images after a photo of dozens of dogs crammed into a living room was branded fake online. Well, the animal charity posted this image on social media, prompting people to comment that they thought it had been made by artificial intelligence or was faked. But the RSPCA said the image was real, from one property where more than 250 poodle cross dogs were found earlier this year. Well, RSPCA Superintendent Joe Hurst said this shocking image is the reality of many multi-animal cases and the situation our frontline officers seem to be confronting more and more, with reports of cases involving 10, 20 and even 100 animals on the rise. We understand that people are so aghast they don't believe what they are seeing. But this photo is not AI, it is real. And it does appear that the RSPCA has seen a 70% increase in what they call multi-animal incidents across England and Wales since 2021. That's more than 10 animals. Presumably it was partly because the value of dogs went up so markedly, you know, during and just after COVID.
I mean, you can see why people thought that image is an AI-generated image, because it just looks so extraordinary that there would be that many dogs in a living room and that someone could live amongst them. And it, you know, later on in the story, it says that the RSPCA did actually decide not to prosecute the people involved because they were extremely vulnerable people, and that they had allowed a kind of breeding situation to get out of control. And, you know, and how the neighbours didn't notice for longer, or, I mean, it is truly an extraordinary story, but apparently, according to those statistics, not particularly uncommon.
Yes, so 250 poodle cross dogs as part of this image. The RSPCA took in 87 dogs. The rest went to the Dogs Trust. But, I mean, it is a desperate situation, isn't it? The charity says they responded to 4,200 incidents, which involved at least 10 animals at the same address last year alone.
I mean, it's a shocking rise. 70% is a huge increase, and you can only think that this has got to be linked to people attempting to breed dogs, perhaps, and then maybe the situation getting out of control, getting out of hand, there being too many animals. But you also, I think, have to think of the costs to the RSPCA of managing these situations. I mean, handling 87 of those dogs yourself and, you know, trying to find them new homes. A lot of people are obviously looking for a dog, but there are plenty of legitimate ways to buy one. And, you know, just even trying to manage that situation, you must be incredibly difficult. Not least, you also think of the impact on the people who have to go to these incidents. I mean, spending all day, every day, going house to house, seeing scenes like that must be truly awful.
Yeah, difficult for their officers, certainly. So, should we take a look at the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers now? Let's kick off with The Guardian. It reports that the ceasefire between the US and Iran is at risk as Israel has continued to bombard Lebanon. The Times leads with a similar headline: airstrikes risk blowing the fragile ceasefire apart, picturing one of those attacks. And also the front page of the Financial Times: Israeli strikes on Lebanon threaten the truce, the paper reports. The Daily Mirror claims a war of words is still ongoing amid confusion over the ceasefire deal, and still it goes on. They talk about the bombardment too. Oil over bar the shouting, I can't even say it, says the front of the Metro. After 40 days of chaos, is it really peace? Daily Mail focuses on Iran's decision to continue charging ships to pass through the Strait of Hormuz, calling it a bizarre kind of victory. But the Eye says UK mine-hunter drones will protect oil in the Strait, while warning that fuel bills are set to stay high. The Telegraph, meantime, claims that President Putin is mocking Keir Starmer in the English Channel as Russian warships escort oil tankers through UK waters in defiance of the Prime Minister's threat to board these shadow fleet vessels. The Sun leads on the growing cost of living crisis here at home in the UK, despite the ceasefire. The Daily Express headline reads, Destination El Dorado UK, reporting that French police watch on as migrants set off in Channel boats. And the Daily Star focuses on this weekend's Grand National with the headline, Red Rum Rides Again. So let's talk more about some of the newspapers then, starting with The Guardian and what we've seen today, which is the clear fragility of this ceasefire on multiple levels. The focus for them has been the bombardment of Lebanon.
Yeah, and just look at those images, which are across quite a few of the front pages. You know, the day of the announcement of a ceasefire, that really sort of brings it into focus, doesn't it? How much devastation has been laid on Lebanon by Israel, by the Israeli strikes. 250 people killed, we think, more than 800 wounded, and absolutely putting the whole region, the ceasefire in the whole region, at risk because of this disconnect about whether Lebanon should have been included as part of the original ceasefire deal.
Yes, and they talk about, you know, confusion and multiple versions. One is differing versions of the actual agreement. Donald Trump at one point calling about 15-point plan. The 10-point plan was yesterday in this 11th hour truce. I mean, you know, we've a lot to learn. Now we know that J.D. Vance is amongst those who will be going to negotiate in Islamabad in Pakistan. Pakistan being involved because it has no US bases, it has a relationship with Iran, and Trump has a relation with one of Pakistan's military leaders. So, you know, an interesting choice there. But there is so much that could still unravel, not least Lebanon, and not least also the Strait of Hormuz, which has been closed, theoretically, at least by Iran again tonight.
It just seems as the weeks go on, this war becomes wider and wider and encompasses more and more states. I mean, looking at the reports tonight, there are also reports of another attack on Saudi Arabia, a Saudi oil pipeline. Keir Starmer, of course, was in Saudi Arabia today. But, yeah, I mean, I think this is a massively complicated, highly interconnected situation in which the pressure that's being put on the Strait of Hormuz and the pressure that, therefore, that is applying on the West and people in the West has drawn all these issues together. And
which is the front page of The Sun, actually, fleecing our time, talking about, you know, having to send the ships to a tiny Iranian island called Larak Island in order to pay their toll, which means, actually, that the fuel prices will continue to be high at the pumps, which is obviously a concern of The Sun for multi-years now as they fight against fuel duty.
Concern of the Sun, also concern of the government. I mean, at the end of the day, we're approaching elections in this country, as parochial as that might seem compared to what's going on internationally. You know, the government will not be wanting consumers to be seeing prices like this, problems with their interest rates on their mortgages, the cost of borrowing. You know, all of these have a very real impact, even though this stuff is happening a long way away.
Yes, and the Times puts a date on it, actually, suggesting that households face 6 months of pain, even if the ceasefire prevails.
Yeah, and what an extraordinary, you know, moment this is, you know, particularly for Keir Starmer, who has started the year being able to say, you know, the economy is turning a corner, and had all these kind of measures of things that were improving, particularly energy bills, 150 quid off energy bills, which was a big intervention in Rachel Reeves's last budget. He was able to point to those rate cuts from the Bank of England. All of those things now going in reverse because of this war where Britain is not, you know, to put it bluntly, a protagonist, and has very little influence over what happens. And therefore, all of those people who were expecting perhaps to come off high-rate deals on their mortgages, now facing the prospect of those going up again. And that just really fuels anger and resentment, and the fact that, you know, people are controlling these situations which are hitting ordinary people, which they have no control over.
Yes, and certainly the paper suggests, quoting an industry source, said, provided the ceasefire holds, the UK will have avoided any supply issues, but it will feel the price effect for months. Supply issues was a whole other ballgame, wasn't it? Let's be honest about it. We've got now some words from NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte. He has been at the White House talking to Donald Trump this evening. He pointed out to Trump, he said, that a large majority of European nations have been helpful. This is in an interview that he's given to CNN. We've certainly not seen him on camera. And he said they had very frank and open discussions with Donald Trump. European nations helpful in a defensive capacity, no doubt. The UK did indeed open its air bases, and many nations allowed overfly. So, but the point, I suppose, that Mark Rutte needs to say is that NATO is a defensive organisation, and Mr. Trump, you started a war.
Well, quite. I mean, that is the purpose of NATO. Let's remember that the one time in its history that Article 5 of the NATO Treaty, the collective defence article, has been invoked was in response to 9/11, when NATO countries came to the aid of the United States. This isn't one of those situations. The US is not directly under threat. Donald Trump has chosen to start military operations in Iran, and he can't expect NATO alliance to row in behind him just because that's what he wants to do.
I see US crude futures have risen after finishing the previous session with the biggest fall in 6 years. So the uncertainty is starting to make oil prices rise again, while we're talking about this. There's been a readout, too, from Downing Street on Sir Keir Starmer's meeting with the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman. The Prime Minister began by welcoming the ceasefire, set out how efforts must now be focused on upholding it and turning it into a lasting peace. He was clear that it was vital now to continue work to reopen the Strait of Hormuz and discuss the UK's ongoing efforts to convene partners to agree and plan the practical steps required to give shipping the confidence to transit the Strait. Feels like that's all kind of slightly out of date with the Strait of Hormuz theoretically at least closed by Iran again tonight.
But, you know, ceasefire is so important to someone like Saudi Arabia, a place which has been hit and directly threatened by Iran, that it would see further retaliation against it, you know, its energy production. If the US, if Donald Trump had followed through with some of his threats that he made early yesterday, it feels like, you know, we've got so many handbrake turns in different directions. It's hard to keep up. But Keir Starmer there trying to provide some reassurance to what has been a very powerful ally.
And reflecting on the defensive operations which have taken place, the Prime Minister thanked Saudi Arabia and their efforts to protect British nationals in the country. He needs to do that with a few nations, I suppose, doesn't he? We know there's a lot of Brits in the UAE, for example. Let's go to the Daily Telegraph, shall we? A really extraordinary story. Last month, Keir Starmer said he gave permission to the military to board Russian Shadow Fleet vessels going through the channel. And here we are as a Shadow Fleet vessel, but now it comes alongside a Russian warship.
That's right. I mean, the mere presence of a Russian warship, the Admiral Grigorovich in the English Channel, is a pretty stark image. I mean, that report comes to you from our reporter who was on a fishing boat just 10 miles off the coast of Dover and watched it with his own eyes. I mean, the British government has promised to crack down on the Shadow Fleet. It has not cracked down as significantly as, for instance, the French and the Americans, who've taken a much more sort of military approach to it. We understood that the National Crime Agency was going to be involved in trying to tackle some of these vessels using sanctions legislation. That was announced to great fanfare by John Healey a couple of weeks ago, and it simply hasn't happened. I think the fact that you can see a military escort there tells you everything you need to know about the position that the Russians take here. I mean, this entire situation is playing out not far from Portsmouth, of course, and Plymouth, where many of our own resources are stationed.
And just one final thought that ties all of this together. Where's the effort to stop that? And Donald Trump suggesting that, that we're not grateful because the US has defended us. What has it shown about, Britain's military capability the last few weeks?
Well, I think you could have seen examples of that from the beginning, right from the beginning of this war, when from that first drone first hit RAF Arcatiri in Cyprus. How many countries were immediately able to get naval resources to that area versus how long it took Britain. Now, of course, it takes a long time to service. There are lots of detailed explanations about why things take as long as they do. But the reality is, if Britain had a bigger, more well-resourced navy and had not been depleted over the course of the last 15 years, which was a political choice, one potentially that you could defend, you could make defences for, then that simply would not happen. So, I think it's shown how vulnerable we are for when there is such volatility in the world, particularly with such a volatile president in the White House.
Yes, a bit more detail from NATO's Secretary-General Mark Rutte now in this meeting with President Trump, where obviously Donald Trump expressed disappointment with America's allies. I was able to point out, Mr. Rutte said, to the fact that the large majority of European nations has been helpful with basing, the air bases we've talked about, with logistics, with overflights, with making sure that they lift up to their commitments, Rutte said to CNN during an interview after that meeting. So a lot of defensive efforts from him. Should we move on to other matters, if all of this is making you sad? The Times suggests that being positive having an optimistic outlook, looking on the bright side of life, could actually cut the risk of dementia?
Well, it's great news. I'm not sure...
That's a segue, isn't it?
I'm not sure it's going to help us after an hour and a half of discussing what's going on in Iran. I think this is really interesting, though, especially because so much money and so much pharmaceutical resources have been dedicated to trying to discover the causes of dementia and things that we can do about it. And actually, you know, looking on the bright side of life, turns out it's free. So that could help all of us.
Yes, this is researchers from the United States and Finland who analysed more than 9,000 people from the US who were deemed cognitively healthy at the start of the study with an average age of 73. And they suggested that being positive brings with it a number of health and cognitive benefits. For example, you're likely to have lower stress levels and you're more likely to be physically active, both of which would help with the onset of dementia.
Well, one of the questions it says they were asked to agree or disagree with is, in uncertain times, I usually expect the best. I feel like after what we've been discussing, that feels like a sentiment that not very few people will be able to agree with. But hopefully, if we all try looking on the bright side, then maybe we can also improve.
I'm not sure I'd include journalists or politicians or world leaders in any ability to do any of this, as you said. But anyway, it's a nice thought, isn't it, if you stay positive and healthy. In the meantime, we know nature is good for mental health as well, including the beautiful picture, which is on the inside pages of The Eye, telling us that we had today the hottest early April for 80 years.
Yeah, I mean, it has been pretty extraordinary, I would say, over the last 24 hours, the kind of heat that we've seen. Sadly, it sounds like it's all going to tail off towards the end of the week. We might get a flicker more sunshine in London tomorrow, but other than that, it's going to be pretty miserable. I mean, it does feel like a little taste of summer early on. I'm now just looking forward to the summer, and we've got to go through the rest of the wet spring before we get there.
Yeah, sorry, I'm happily reading about this story about the tulip farm with 1.5 billion bulbs. I only say that because I only planted my bulbs about 2 weeks ago, which I know is completely wrong. Anyway, that's, you know, I think the weather forecast is coming up later this hour as I dwell on tulips to give myself a bit of a break. I was also drawn to the fact that AI can also spot fat linked to heart failure risk as well. Invisible fat around the heart. This is the future of AI, isn't it? But anyway, I start to just randomly read the newspapers at this time of night. Both of you, thank you very much indeed. It's been interesting to look at how the ceasefire is holding and what the strains are on it this evening. So, Jessica and Tony, much appreciated. Thank you both very much indeed. Well, coming up next, we have the sport. Liverpool's last chance of winning silverware this season is hanging by a thread after they were beaten 2-0 at PSG in the Champions League.
Liberation Day.
By popular demand, here we are.
Donald Trump. It is quite the story. Wherever it goes, on Trump 100, we go with it.
Can you tell us who you're looking for?
Unbelievable we've come to this.
Are you overstating the reach and significance of this deal? Not like you said it.
From the UK?
Why don't you go back to your country where you have a major migrant problem?
It was 10 feet from him, and all of a sudden the shots rang out.
People impacted.
I'll tell you on another day on the podcast what that was all about.
Join us wherever you get your podcast.
A lifeline for millions of people living on both sides of one of the most volatile international borders.
It's dams like these that have become inflection points between the two nuclear-armed neighbors, which could potentially lead to water wars in the future. A terror attack has shattered the peace and tranquility of Kashmir. At least 26 people have been killed and as many injured when militants fired upon them. I'm Neville Lazarus, and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi.
The old and young, all weary after being trapped for days, as the worst floods have hit Kerala in a century.
3 days we are on a rooftop. They have no food, nothing.
The roads have been inundated. The only way out is to get people by boat. There have been reported deaths and many injuries, several critical.
Many families will grapple with the unimaginable loss of one of the worst disasters in India's aviation history.
The spiraling violence between two nuclear-armed neighbors that harbor decades of hostility just seems to be getting worse by the day.
Garbage dumps like this not only threaten the lives of millions of people, but also pose a deadly consequence on the environment and climate.
It is a source of death, decay, disease, and pollution for hundreds of thousands of people living in its shadows.
There is so much disease because of this garbage. Sometimes it's so difficult to just breathe.
Companies like these are helping India in its trajectory to be a serious player in space exploration. Over the next 45 days, an estimated 400 million Hindu pilgrims are expected to converge here in Prayagraj on the banks of the holy river Ganga and Yamuna. It's a real kaleidoscope of people from all walks of life.
The best thing about being a Sky News journalist?
They call him the king of the jungle.
Being a Sky News journalist.
Yusra Al-Baghir has this report.
And this is what's left of it.
As a woman of colour, how did the Harris campaign speak to you?
People risk their lives to speak to us for this report.
Mr. Zuma, Sky News.
We're trying to see as much as we can.
The best thing about being a Sky News journalist? I'm going to take you behind the scenes here for Election Night Live. They have gone up and up. Big Sky News journalist. Ed Conway. Sky News, is anyone going to talk to us? Mortgage rates did go up very sharply during your time in office. Here it is. First off, just the scale of what we're looking at. Our data shows it's been happening. Question is, why it hasn't been stopped.
Let's get the latest sport now. Here is Mike from Sky Sports News.
Perfect, thank you very much.
A footballer's life is all about moving. I never had a problem with that because I was the one that was progressing in my football career.
The Crazy Gang's welcoming committee were making sure their new arrival enjoyed a warm welcome.
I'd had a small arthroscopy operation, and at that particular time there was a lot of clubs interested in me.
But in a last-minute twist, Wimbledon learned John Hartson would not be moving as Spurs.
John Hartson was last week tipped to be on his way across South London for £5 million. That seems a dead deal.
I don't want to do any more medicals, to be honest.
I can't pass a medical because of this knee.
A downbeat John Hartson was rushed out of Ibrox today, having been given the worst possible news.
We did not believe he was at the correct fitness at that particular time to go straight into Champions League.
Very seldom you see a player in the building walking around at a club and the deal isn't done.
I'm starting to question myself. I'm starting to think, well, where do I go from here?
The best medical he ever failed. I knew about his injuries, but that didn't matter to me because I think John had played 20 consecutive games for Coventry.
I was going to an absolute giant in Celtic Football Club.
Another season, another club for John Hartson.
So I've proved that my knee's fine and my fitness is good.
This was my complete say. I think he wanted to prove his fitness, and I think he wanted to prove Rangers wrong.
And here's Hartson!
Celtic fans hold John in the highest regard.
Incredible Ronaldo.
Celtic Football Club, to me, is a very special place.
These are the two strikers that have grabbed George Graham's eye, and at quite a cost. John Hartson, the teenager, arrives at Highbury in return for a cheque to the tune of £2.5 million.
It's just brilliant for me, like, you know, it's just a dream come true, really, to come to a club as big as Arsenal.
A lot of my career I've moved around. When you get offered to go and sign for big clubs, a footballer's life is all about moving and, you know, resettling, but I never had a problem with that. I went to Luton at 16 on a YTS scheme, progressed, and there was quite a few clubs interested in me at that time.
It's just a new start for me, you know, I've just got to start fresh and just perhaps show people, you know, what I can do.
I had 2 great years at Arsenal. They bid £2.5 million, which was a British teenage transfer record at the time.
He was bought for a certain part of the team, a more physical side. By the way, how good was he in the air? We were good at set pieces, you know, and long throws, and that's what John was fantastic at. In out-and-out 9, that's exactly what John was.
Arsene, this way, please.
Arsene Wenger came in, and I remember Arsene Wenger was superb. And he asked me to stay. He said, look, John, he said there was a few clubs wanting me to sign me, and he said to me, look, we'd really like you to stay.
Well, hottest day of the year for 80 years, so let's take a peek at what's in store.
Dinner under the stars tonight?
That reminds me of our travel insurance.
You mean All Clear Skies?
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors Sky News weather.
Yes, we had the highest temperature of the year today, but a change of wind direction will make it much cooler tomorrow. So a mild, fairly cloudy start tomorrow with prolonged rain for much of Scotland and showers for the west of Ireland. But the southeastern half of England looks sunny. England and Wales will see clouds spreading to all except the far southeast during the morning, bringing a little patchy rain to northern and western parts. Scotland, meanwhile, will see cloud and rain giving way to sunny spells and blustery showers, some heavy with hail and thunder, and wintry on the mountains. Ireland and Northern Ireland can expect sunshine and showers throughout. It will be cooler everywhere, although still quite warm in the southeast. England and Wales will see cloud and what little rain there is clearing to the southeast later on, with showers moving in behind. Scotland, Ireland and Northern Ireland, meanwhile, will be showery into the evening. Friday will start mostly fine, but western parts will turn wet and windy, and it will be rather cool again.
All Clear Travel Insurance proudly sponsors Sky News weather.
Well, that was the wrap. Thank you so much for watching. We'll have all the top stories coming up right here on Sky News, and I'll see you from 10 tomorrow. See you soon.
What's the best thing about being a Sky News journalist?
Who's funnier?
Being a Sky News journalist. A special edition of The World with me, Yalda Hakim.
Pakistan had the right to respond.
You're like, what?
A historic day here today. Congratulations, this is a huge moment. But what happens now?
What's the best thing about being a Sky News presenter?
We've done the work and the reading, so you don't have to.
Being a Sky News presenter.
Hello and welcome. Westminster, the heart of British politics.
I'm so sorry about what happened to you.
So what on earth is going on?
It's not true.
Can I tell you what I think? It's really unusual.
Mornings with Richard Frost. Let's crack on. Let's get started.